Hey guys, Mr. Griggs here doing some guided notes with you here on the YouTubes. Basically going to narrate the notes for you here as we move forward with our remote learning. So the notes are here provided for you. You can just follow along. I'm going to leave a copy of the notes on Google Classroom so that you can either print them out or download them and save them on your drive or something along those lines. They'll always be on Classroom. So I'm going to get into this, some of the new content, some of the notes that we left with on our last day of school so many weeks ago. Post-war Europe and the rise of fascist dictators in Europe. We're going to be focusing in on Germany and Nazi Germany here. Today's lesson is going to focus on the Weimar Republic. All right. And I got a couple objectives for you to focus on as we go through these notes here today and probably for the next week or so as we look at the rise of the Nazis in Germany. We want to understand how the aftermath of World War I led to the rise of Nazi Germany. And how Hitler gained, consolidated, and maintained power in Germany. These are going to be really important objectives for you to understand in order to be successful in this unit. So here's the map of Europe after World War I. You can see these are the boundaries set up by the Treaty of Versailles. All right, and this is from 1919 to 1929. And you will see some new countries created. We already know that the Soviet Union, the USSR, is a new nation starting in 1917 after the Russian Revolution. But some of the new countries in the game here are Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria-Hungary, and Yugoslavia. Now, there are others, but I'm just going to name check those ones right now. Germany, it says Germany here, but this is known during this time period as the Weimar Republic. All right, and we'll go into this a little bit in the notes and why it's really important. So here it is. Here's a map, Weimar Republic. It's going to last from 1918 to 1933 when Adolf Hitler creates Nazi Germany, a one-party totalitarian dictatorship. All right, so after World War I, Germany is forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. They weren't really allowed to, say the rules or, really create this document, but they were forced to swallow the pill, if you will. And it made Germany do a few things. It made them take blame for the war. This is the war blame clause here. And it also had them pay a ton of money to the Allied powers as a result of the war for causing the damage, throughout Europe. Whether or not it was all of Germany's fault, that is certainly up for debate. I think most historians agree that the blame should be really spread out throughout, but the winners go the spoils, I suppose, here at the end of the war. Now, Germany's military will be reduced substantially. They won't be allowed to have like an air force or anything along those lines after the First World War, and this is going to really hurt the feelings, if you will, and the national pride of the German people after the war, and that's going to be a major factor to Hitler's rise in the 1920s and 1930s. Also, they're going to lose territory to France and Poland and also Denmark, but substantial lands here. Alsace-Lorraine, which was given to the Germans or taken by the Germans after the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, will be given back to France. There's going to be a region known as the Polish Corridor, which is going to split East Prussia from the rest of the Weimar Republic or Germany. And that's going to be a really big deal to the Germans. They're really going to hate this. It's going to literally split Germany into two. And they're going to give that land to Poland. So that's really going to upset the Germans for sure. And last but not least, they're forced to institute a democratic government known as the Weimar Republic. All right. So, what is the Weimar Republic all about? Well, it's a very interesting period in German history. Right after World War One, everyone in Europe is trying to figure out what the heck just happened to them. It's an existential crisis. It is a major shock to the system. The millions and millions of casualties and deaths that occurred, kind of stunted, the economic growth and the cultural growth of Germany and the rest of the European nations during this time period. So, in terms of the arts and in terms of the culture of the Weimar Republic of Germany during this time period, there's a new sense of freedom. Right? There's this new sense of trying to better understand the world and to experiment. People are starting to try new things in different mediums, whether it be art, whether it be music, whether it be filmmaking, whether it be architecture and design. They're trying new things. All right. And we've got a couple examples for you. Two examples in the art world are Dada and the surrealist art movement. I'll show you a few examples of this in the next slide. But really, at the end of the day, this type of movement, or these movements here, are trying new things. They're highly experimental, and trying to be kind of out there and a little weird and different from the art that came before. And one example of this is one of my favorite artists, and that's Max Ernst. He's a Dada artist who transitions into the surrealist movement, and he's going to actually leave Germany during the 1930s because the Nazis are really not going to like his art. They're going to call it degenerate art, and they're going to persecute a lot of these artists because they don't see it as really jiving with the Nazi regime, and we'll get to that later. Expressionism, or German Expressionism, is a film movement, and there are some really interesting films that are created during this time period that are going to be landmarks in the film world. And two of these include The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is one of the first horror films ever made. It's a silent film. I showed in my AP European History class, and it was released in 1919. And it was a very confusing film to a lot of people, and it also scared the living daylights out of a lot of people, as did Nosferatu, which is a early Dracula film. They didn't really have the rights to, the legal right to make a film based on Dracula, but they did it anyways. They just changed the names and everything like that. And I'll show you that a little bit later as well. They also have modern architecture known as the Bauhaus movement, which is, this early modern architecture movement that was really influential in Germany and throughout the world. And you'll see a lot of influence in that throughout many cultures. In music, we also see this type of experimental music known as atonal music, which it's you can ask a music teacher more about it, but really it just changes the format of how music is written and how it sounds, and it kind of scared a lot of people. A lot of people don't like change when it comes to music, which is kind of a comforting thing for a lot of folks. So when all of a sudden these new radical ideas come out of nowhere, then you really you start to see a lot of pushback. And Arnold Schoenberg is going to be a main proponent of this throughout Austria and Germany. And he's also going to leave Germany during the Nazi regime period. And he comes to the United States to make his music. Now, conservatives, and especially the Nazis, they hated these new forms of art. They're going to burn a lot of these paintings. They're going to chase a lot of these artists out of Nazi Germany, and a lot of them are going to die during the Holocaust as well. So it's really during this Weimar period from 1918 to 1933 where these forms of art flourished. but they certainly won't during the Nazi era. Moving forward. Okay, there's an example of Dada and surrealist art. Over here, you see a classic example of surrealist art. You probably didn't get a good sense of what it was like in my description before, but hopefully this kind of gives you a good idea of what the surrealists were all about. They're really into things like dream states and the subconscious, and they read a lot of Sigmund Freud, who was a psychologist during this time period, who had a lot of radical, game-changing ideas that you'll learn about in psychology class. And then you see some examples of Dada art over here, which collage is a main medium for Dada art, kind of bringing in these random things to create something new. Really influential and very interesting. You should ask your art teacher about it if you have any more questions, or myself if you have any questions. Here's a screenshot from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is a 1919 film I mentioned earlier. It's just a really interesting movie. You know, when I show it to the kids in AP Euro, they think it's going to be this really slow, boring, black and white, silent film, but it really does blow them away at the end of the day. It's a very good film, and it has a really good twist. And Nosferatu, you probably have seen this Dracula villain before, and this really creepy scene where his shadow is kind of walking up the stairs here. It's just a really cool, eerie film, and something that is just classic Germany in the 1920s. Just the horrors of the world around them being translated to film. It's very interesting. Now, the Weimar Republic becomes a democracy. And Germany had never really had a democracy before. They had always been an empire with a Kaiser or a king. And before that, they were, dozens and dozens of independent states before the unification process with Bismarck. So they have this parliamentary system with the chancellor. It's kind of like a president. And they have voting, so they have universal suffrage. Women could vote during this time period. This is a time period when women started to gain the right to vote across the world, definitely in the United States and in Germany as well. And they had a Bill of Rights, which protected the people's rights, which is really important. But it did have problems. It was exceptionally weak, the government. There was a large group of communists in the government that wanted to overthrow the democracy that was created. They obviously didn't like capitalism, and the Weimar Republic was a capitalist nation. And there were conservatives who wanted to bring the Kaiser back. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm II had abdicated the throne at the end of World War I, and he had spent his days after World War I in the Netherlands, actually. So he wasn't there in Germany or in the Weimar Republic during this time. But really, the problems that occurred in the Weimar Republic, many people blame them on the Treaty of Versailles. And I think most of the problems here are economic issues. And here's a nice little graphic that shows you how the government is set up. I'm not going to go into it right now, but that's something you can take a look at. You can pause it, or you can look at the slides if you want to. It's very interesting. Now, here's the deal. Some of the stipulations in the Treaty of Versailles, including the war reparations, were very hard to follow through on because, quite frankly, Germany didn't have the money to pay the other nations back. So what ended up happening here is they started to print money, which is a huge problem, and we'll talk about that in a second.